Welcome to Season 2 of Church Unscripted. We're excited to have you with us, and we have some good news, some new news that we're on all podcasting platforms, so make sure when you go on there, you give us a rating or a review on there, and be able to subscribe so you can listen to this every week. We're excited. We're still on YouTube, of course, but we also have all these other platforms that you can listen to us on while you're going for a run, or you're out with the kids, or whatever you're doing, you can listen to this podcast. And so I'm excited because this is a new year. Yep. And this is a new Church Unscripted, and we have a new series. Is there any other things I can say is new? Is there anything else new?
Lots of stuff new, but we'll have to save those for surprises later.
Okay, surprises later on. All right, we'll have some new things in the next few weeks, right?
Perfect.
So,
yes.
So I'm excited about that. So, Eric, can you maybe give us a summary for those that maybe missed Sunday? What was your sermon about? What's the new series called? Like, what are we going through right now?
It's a new series called In the Ring. And it's the image of boxers getting into the ring to fight, right? And the reason that, let's go. Come on right now. Yeah.
You get that side.
Take you both.
It's a little unfair. Yeah, he's got
So In the Ring is a concept of, it's really a marriage series. So this is going to lead up until, what's that holiday in February?
I think it's Valentine's Day.
That's the one. That's
until Valentine's
Maybe.
Day.
No, of course
What's
I didn't
Valentine's
forget Valentine's
Day?
Day. I would never do that.
You won't forget now.
Of course not. I was just testing you.
Oh, thanks.
That's what I was doing.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. But it's a marriage series, and so the concept is a lot of marriages are doing one of two things. They're either in the ring fighting against each other, and this is where marriages begin to fall apart, or they're in the ring fighting with each other against other enemies. And so I believe Scripture is very, very clear. We've each experienced it. There's all kinds of things in the world around us, including culture, including Hollywood, including our very real enemy called Satan.
Hallmark.
You got to be
say Hallmark.
I can't handle watching Hallmark movies, but I don't know if they're an enemy. All right. Yeah. I'm not a fan of Hallmark, but they're
great movies.
Moving
They're great
on.
movies.
Okay, great movies.
Don't get yourself
very
in trouble.
Healthy and holistic. But I mean, the idea is, what are you doing? Are you fighting against each other, or are you fighting with each other against other enemies that are actively trying to erode and destroy your marriage? So that's basically the concept. It'll be a 6-week series, and we started this week in Genesis, the first 2 chapters of the first book of your Bible, where God establishes not just male and female, but establishes the nature of the male-female relationship, which will lead into what the marriage relationship ought to be built off of.
You started with some pretty deep stuff this week. I feel like you got fired up at one point, and I'm like, I wanted to cheer, right? And so we here definitely believe in Jesus-centered homes, and like we want people to have Jesus-centered homes and gospel-saturated communities. So how does that apply in a rapidly evolving digital world? Because you're talking about marriage relationships, but there's technology and social media that get in between those marriage relationships and dominate our interactions. So like how can we have Jesus-centered homes and a gospel-saturated community when other things are keeping us from that? Technology keeps us from that.
Yeah, David, I think you're versed on this, but at least in my own, and so I want to hear your response to this, but in my own interaction with social media, it can be very deceptive. Because, it kind of helps build community. You can keep up on what's happening with your friends and family and neighbors and so forth, and that's all fun. But I often discover that when it comes to marriage relationships on social media, why would you ever present anything other than the best of your marriage, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, some people do that in some kind of weird humility, but
no, it's like an Instagram, like, oh, look at me.
Yeah,
right?
Something like that. But I mean, it's always pictures of you having great times with each other and encouraging each other and complimenting each other, and that's not bad, except that can be very fictitious.
Yeah.
And so what that can do for us is we can get the impression that every other marriage on social media, every other family, every other home is so healthy, so strong. What's wrong with mine?
Yeah.
Until you begin to get into the weeds of those families and understand what's going on and realize, okay, they're broken just like me. Yeah. And so I think that's at least one of the dangers of digital social media as you apply it to the family and marriage context.
For sure. I agree with that. Like, I know people are posting what they want people to think of them. So they're only posting the good things. And that is tricky. I think when Katie and I were first married, there was like this weird thing where it's like, well, other people are posting about their spouses or whatever, and like, do I do that? Like, and you know, most of the times if I would post about Katie or our family or whatever, it's in good seasons. But in the bad seasons, I'm not like, let me post this. You know, it's only show the good part. So definitely see the effects of that in culture, in marriages.
Should we start an Instagram page where it's only pictures of us yelling at our kids or arguing with our wife? Or I'm just saying, like, as you guys are saying this, I'm like, well, I feel like we're all, social media is like one hand of that, right?
Yeah. And I think the other part of that, like the other side of the coin was, I as you were saying that, I think we can actually, in our marriages, and there's been seasons where Katie and I have fallen into this, where we both are, maybe the kids are down to bed, we're sitting just relaxing, and we're both on our phones on social media or YouTube or whatever, just kind of searching stuff. And that actually drives us further apart because, we're sitting next to each other, but we're just looking at all the good things about everybody else, sitting there like, well, like, oh, well, she didn't do that, or he didn't do that, or that family's doing this, so maybe we should do that, or we should. And so it becomes this comparison thing, but it also divides us when we're sitting next to each other if we're not careful too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think of it like this sometimes is social media is for people that you can't physically see in the space you're in, if that makes sense. So like my cousin that lives in Montana, I can connect with them through Facebook. Maybe I'll give them a phone call, but I can't actually physically be with them. But when it comes to our spouse, really, we're not like messaging our spouse on social media. We might text them back and forth through the day because we can't like talk on the phone. We're at work or something, whatever. We're in the middle of something. But I think the reality is, especially when it comes to marriage, if we're just taking marriage, the best forms of communication is setting aside time for that communication. Because David, you know, when you're saying that, I'm like, totally been there. Yeah. I've totally like sat down. We're like sitting in bed and I'm thinking, we're not even watching TV. There's nothing on. It's just like, and I'm like, looking over and she's like this and I'm like thinking, well, this is a waste of our time. Like we should be doing something where we're connecting because there's no kids screaming or crazy stuff happening or bedtime happening. And so I think you know, adjusting our expectations when it comes to social media and digital interactions to that is the least common denominator. I mean, meeting with someone in person, being present with them physically is a huge thing. And then, you know, telephone maybe, and then you go down and texting even falls in, I would argue, the social media category because text can be misinterpreted. You read your emotions into a text. And so that can cause marital conflict because you're literally saying one thing, but your spouse is thinking another. And it's not because they're in the wrong or you're in the wrong. It's just because they're thinking differently than you. And so they don't hear your tone of voice.
I'm curious.
Of all you got a curious face there. You're like, wait a second.
Of all the questions you could have used to start this conversation, you brought up the social media's impact on marriage. And I didn't bring that up in the sermon, and that's totally fine. Didn't need to. I'm just saying, why was that the first question you brought up?
A couple reasons.
Yeah.
I think that our technology destroys marriages. I think... I had a conversation with you last week, and I talked a little bit about neglect, and that's one of the ways we neglect our spouse is when we're staring at a phone or a screen or not paying attention to our family, our kids. Again, if we don't have a family, if we don't have kids, if we're single, still being present with the people around us is more important. But if you notice, I've said this before, there's like a lot of people that are just sitting there going like this all the time. You can be talking with someone, and your attention's divided. So I think you didn't even bring it up, but the reality is the undercurrent of all that is I heard, okay, if I'm going to fight for my marriage, I've got to fight for it in this area. You notice there's been a trend of couples that have a Facebook together or a Instagram together, and most of the reason that's been is because there was struggles in the past with communication. There was never infidelity or anything like that, but there was just like, okay, what's okay for us to communicate? We need to have access to everyone's communication, which I think is totally fair. But I find that it's a very deceptive thing. I think social media is actually something Satan uses. I'm not saying it's bad because, I mean, if that argument were to say if social media is bad, then eating's bad and guns are bad and everything's bad because it can be used for evil things. It still is like the sin in our hearts. But I would say specifically, social media tends to divide us. And so that's why, like when I was listening to your sermon, that's like the theme that I kept hearing through the whole thing.
Well, I mean, you kind of make a good, well, not kind of, you do make a good point, because one of the things that was the foundation for not just relationships but marriages is the fact that both male and female are built from the image of God. So the likeness of God is built into each one of us, and that is the catalyst that brings male and female together. Not just in a marriage relationship, but male and female just in community. And so what you're suggesting is that social media tends to have more of a tendency to divide rather than to bring together. Okay.
Well, we use social media, like, for example, if you're sitting in a chair by yourself with no one in the room and you're scrolling through social media, you're not actually losing relationship. You may be gaining relationship, let's just say, just big picture. But when you're sitting next to your spouse or you're sitting next to your kids and they're asking for you to read a book and you're saying no because you're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or whatever, that seems to me that that's dividing.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. Would you say that social media has a bigger negative impact on marriages than, say, addiction, whether that's alcoholism or pornography or
I think social
substance
media
abuse
is an addiction.
It can be. It's an addiction.
I think it's
there's a dopamine hit when you get a like.
There's something about it. Like the reason, like one of the things that Katie and I are really wrestling through this year specifically is social media and just the what is causing me to engage in social media. And there are good things on social media, and then there's things that draw your attention away. So I would say if it's left unchecked, it can easily become like any other addiction. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, it is producing a chemical response, and there's statistics on that. You wonder why all the big tech guys like Steve Jobs that passed away, like you have Zuckerberg, they have strict rules for their kids about not being on screens a certain period of time, and they don't want their kids to be on those same social media platforms. And yet they're trying to sell us, the rest of the populace, to be on those. And the reality is they know the effects of that. I'm sorry, maybe I'm being just really sick, but this is so, like, you're like, what does this have to do with marriage? Someone's on here and they're like, just saw the last 3 minutes and they're like, I thought we were talking about marriage and fighting for marriage. I think one way of fighting for our marriage is realizing the barriers that are keeping us from connecting in intimacy with our spouse. That's
and calling them out and not being offended by somebody, one or the other calling that out. Because I think there's even outside of social media, there's so many distractions that we can engage in. I mean, like, we could sit and read a book next to each other, and that's the same distraction. So you have to be, I think earlier you used the word present, like what's taking me from being present. I think you have to fight to be present in order to build your marriage, or else those distractions are just going to eat you alive.
That's a good transition to a thought. I mean, you brought up like fighting for your marriage, and one of those ways is being present. So do you guys have some practical ideas of like how to be present with your spouse? What are some things that you guys do? What are some things you've heard other people do? So maybe, like, I don't want to be prescriptive and say everyone needs to do things the way we're doing them, but there's obviously ways to set aside time generally. How do you guys do that?
Well, that's why the fourth of the take-homes was to keep the date. That's why the title itself is called Keep the Date, because being present with your spouse requires intentionality. And so we all have these great aspirations of saying, I can't wait to date my wife and to spend time with her, and that'll never happen unless you get disciplined about it. And so especially if you have kids in the home, that'll make it virtually impossible unless you sit down with a calendar and say, all right, next Friday, we're going to call in advance and get babysitting. And we're going to set aside $50 to pay for that babysitting. And while they're there for 3 hours, we're going to take the most of that time, and we're going to make the most of that time. We're going to go out to dinner to a place that we both enjoy. And while we're there, we might even have a list of things to talk about, because sometimes, I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes just in the moment, you have a hard time thinking of conversation. So if I come prepared with I'm going to have
you having trouble thinking of conversation. You always give me 50 questions. You're good at that.
No. I didn't say I don't have a problem interrogating. I have sometimes a problem with conversation.
Heather probably doesn't like interrogating.
That's way different. But no, if you have a plan, not just where you're going to go, when you're going to do that, What are you going to talk about? And so keeping the date is so much about intentionality and discipline. And I think it might feel like that's not relational because relationships are meant to be like just fluid and go with the flow. And I don't really agree with that.
So one thing you're saying, like to the person watching or listening, so how do we, I mean, you're saying we have to be intentional. I don't know many men in my sphere with kids my age that feel they have the time to go, I'm going to write out 5 questions we're going to talk about on our date. So how do we do that?
Oh, that to me, that's not a valid excuse.
I'm just asking.
Because if you say, I don't have time to do it, you better make time or time is going to catch up with you and you're going to lose it. Yeah. And so one of the things that, time goes so fast. And so if you say, I don't have time to be relational with my wife, it's the same excuse you would use to say, I don't have time to spend time in scriptures and pray. And you have to be disciplined. And if whatever excuse comes up, you say, all right, what's my priorities? So what are the things that are taking your time that's making it impossible to have time for your spouse? And then you say, all right, are those things more important than my wife? Here's something that somebody told me a while ago, and it's a piece of advice I've never forgotten. I think I might have said it on this podcast as well. But as much as we love ministry, and as much as we love the church, right? We want to give a ton of our time to it because we love it. But eventually, our time at church is going to come to an end. We're either going to retire, or we're going to quit and go somewhere else, or we're going to be fired and have to go somewhere else, or God's going to call us home. But until he calls us home, when we leave the church, whenever that is, the only thing that's going to come with us is our spouse. As soon as I leave Brookside, it won't be long before I'm forgotten. Now, people aren't going to be like, well, who is Eric? No, it's going to be like, we're going to keep moving. And there's going to be a new pastor. And hopefully that's not for a long time, but eventually that's going to happen. And what I will have left is my wife. So the advice was, don't let the church or anything else become the mistress that takes the place of your wife. And that might not just be the church. That might be sports. Some of us are so into like
sports, video games. I'm like, when you said that, I was like, there's a list of mistresses.
Even exercise. Exercise is hugely important, isn't it? But if it's like, that's the only time my wife and I could connect, then either find another time to exercise at the expense of something else, or bring your wife with you and exercise together. So the excuse of, I don't have time to make time, that's just dumb. And that's never going to work.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm okay. I just threw the question out there, man. Don't hurt the messenger.
Well,
I know someone's thinking that.
One of the things you were addressing was like, what do I talk to my wife about? Was that kind of what you said? You come with like a list of questions.
Get creative, man.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've discovered is like having young kids, we don't get to talk about like what's going on in our hearts very much, because it's very like, get the kids there, pick them up there, put them to bed there. Okay, we're tired, go to bed, wake up, do it again. And so on date nights, it's an opportunity to just be like, okay, so like what's going on in your heart right now? And that question will lead you to hours of conversation. Like you don't have to necessarily like have an agenda. Sometimes it's helpful depending on personality and the way that you interact with your spouse. But I think.
So, David, do you think a lot of people think like that, though? Like, I'm listening to you, and I want to hear men from Brookside go up to their wife, sit with them, and say, "How is your heart right now?" Because I can tell you, there's men that need to say that.
But that's what I'm saying is, I think as men, it doesn't come natural to say like, "How are you feeling? Like, how are you doing?" Like, the kids have seemed to be like a little extra this week. Like, how has that affected you? Like, those kinds of things. Like, pursue the heart of your spouse. Rather than just like so did you have a good week?
Yeah.
And so I think the encouragement there is like, I don't get it right every time. And there's times when Katie's like, hey, I told you last week that I had a really hard day and you never asked me about it.
And we've never made that mistake before.
Never done that?
No, you should post about it on Instagram.
Man. But you know what that requires? That requires work.
Right.
And you're right. Nobody is so good at conversation that it just flows. If you're just a chatterbox, that's not a conversation. You're just talking. Right.
Yeah.
So you were.
So I think that was the encouragement to men, is to say, like, if you don't know what to talk about, just remind yourself to pursue your wife's heart. And if you can pursue her heart, then eventually that conversation is just going to become natural. And you don't have to come out and say like, so how's your heart today?
Yeah.
But like, note it, like, be intentional about noticing things about maybe, you came home and your wife was uptight because of dinner and the kids or whatever. Like, keep that in mind. And then when you go to your date, just be like, hey, I noticed, this week you just, seem to be like, have a hard time with this. How can I help you? Or what's going on that?
David, are you asking us to have observational skills?
Well,
Stop it.
That's work too.
Come on.
That's work
Come on.
too.
That's like graduate. But I mean, what you're talking about is really getting to the theme of the entire sermon, and that is the role of man, the way that God called men to cultivate creation, which is women as part of His creation. Yeah. Is to work for the care of it. Yeah. And so when men say, it's just not natural. It's not easy for me to have conversation. Well, again, you're just playing into our carnal nature, where God says, no, you got to work at this. And so I need to find a book on it. I'm hoping somebody wrote a book on it. If not, I think we need to write it. But title it "The Art of Conversation," and the theme would be, stop giving one-word responses and killing conversations. Learn to create like a dance of conversation where there's a give and take. And so, for example, if
did you just say dance? I'm like stuck on you just said dance. I'm like, dance of conversation.
Just cul-de-sacs all day long over here.
He was about to say something really important.
Jeez, it was a dance of conversation.
This was not
the back and forth. The back and forth.
A little rough. We need to work on our dance.
Okay.
That's right.
2 left feet.
Get him, David. Anywhere. Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted over here? Dancing? No, not dancing.
The dance of conversation.
That's it. So, for example, if you ask me the question, hey, how'd the meeting go? You're trying to start a conversation with me, and I say, it went great, thanks. I just killed the conversation. There's no response to that.
Right.
So if you say, how was the meeting? I'd say, I think it went well. Thank you very much. I mean, it started off where we were talking about this, and that was kind of boring. But then it got into this conversation, and this is where we really started to gel. I mean, this person had this idea, and then this person had this idea. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm making conversation, and I'm giving you opportunity to take a hold of one of the things I say and respond back. That's the dance I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So you could say, oh, wow, I'm surprised that thought came from that person. Yeah. It's interesting. Where'd they get that idea from? And like, okay, where'd you guys get conclusion from? Oh, we got a conclusion when this person said, here's an idea, and the rest of us said. All of a sudden, I took one question, I turned it into a longer conversation as opposed to the meeting went great, thanks. Yeah. And now it's dead. If you can start practicing that on your dates, you don't have to think of 18 different conversations. You can think of 3 and just let that little line of thought, that train of thought go all over the place. And
then just ask questions.
So let's broaden it a little bit. Yes, we're talking about marriage, but some people watching or listening probably aren't married. True. So that skill that you just described is a skill for every relationship, friendship, right? I mean, I just want everyone to understand
every interaction.
Every interaction. Yeah. Asking open-ended questions, having I love how you called it a dance, because it is kind of a dance. You're like, okay, if they don't give me enough information, I'm just going to ask them another question that adds to more, I think what you just described is actually one of the most important skills that I would say most people don't have, and I would argue that it's very hard for men to do in general. Mm-hmm. Like, we get down to the details. Yeah, social media, because we get distracted.
Are we still on social media?
I'm just saying, I'm bringing it back.
So I've got a couple other questions I'd like to just, kind of walk through. One of them is there's a rising trend of non-traditional families. There's blended families and different opportunity or different things like co-parenting or relationships. How does the concept of Jesus-centered homes adapt in those diverse dynamics? Because we talked about marriage, but there is a marriage of sorts, especially with parenting. How can we have Jesus-centered homes in that context? And, fight for what's right. Sometimes that's a battle too, right?
My initial response is, I think the more diverse the family is, the more work you're going to have to put into it. But I think it's still just as possible to be a Jesus-centered home as anybody else. I mean, God designed the family to be one man and one wife for life, and then children being born into that home. That was his original. But of course, sin has come in, and there are so many marriages now and families that are broken because of that. Now, it doesn't mean that the people are bad people. It doesn't mean that they're evil and God's mad at them. What it does mean is that there has to be some adjustment made to bring Jesus back into the center. And the way you're going to do that is you've got to figure out how to operate in a blended family where there's 2 families coming in with two different cultures, two different sets of values, two different backgrounds, two different ideas for vacations, two different ways of how to do dinner, and all kinds of things. And so it's going to have to be a lot of work, but it's worth it. Because if you're going to commit to that kind of family dynamic, which you should, then you ought to also at the same time commit to it becoming more Jesus-centered and not compromise on that. But it's just as possible. It's just that based on the dynamics, it might require some more work.
It's more complicated. Because I mean, if we were to pull Brookside as a whole, or Fort Wayne as a whole, let's say, we'd probably find a 50-50 of traditional marriage and then some type of blended family or something like that. And so for families that are like that, when they hear a sermon about, fight for your marriage, I'm thinking, well, how do we have Jesus-centered homes when, some of that dynamic is completely different now, especially with kids?
I think some of that is going back to like keeping the date and like actually calling out those conversations. I mean, even in a traditional family setting, like with discipline, like Katie and I have to talk about that, or else we're both going to do something different and it's not going to be unified. And so I think you have to fight even harder. Like you're saying, work harder to be unified in those situations. And I think it's definitely possible.
Absolutely.
So I love making and ending questions really difficult. So you know how I like starting with the hard questions and ending with the hard questions? Just kidding. I do. So how do we address the tension? There's some tension here because there's blended families, there's traditional family homes, and then there's some people that are trying to establish Jesus-centered homes, but they're individuals in a strained or toxic family environment. Where the presence of Jesus may feel unattainable or unrealistic. How do we address that tension as a believer? Like, what if we feel that we're the only one in our family that's trying to have a Jesus-centered home? What if we're the only one that feels like we're in the ring and the other person's not in the ring? How do we fight correctly?
You bring up, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that is the case for so many Brookside families, far more than we realize and can think of. One of the realities I've discovered is that you cannot control anybody else. You can only control yourself. And so if you are legitimately the only one attempting to pursue a Jesus-centered culture in your home, don't stop pursuing that because Jesus can honor that. And while you're doing that, you don't have to worry about everyone else in your family because you need to believe that the Holy Spirit is pursuing them far more than you can. And so if you are actively trying to bring Jesus into your life, now all of a sudden you become a light. I mean, there's a reason why followers of Jesus are called light in a dark world. And what better place to shine the light of Jesus in a home that you believe is spiritually dark. And you just have to trust that Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Heavenly Father are aggressively pursuing the hearts and minds of everyone else in your home so that eventually they'll begin to catch up to your faith. Now, that does not mean that you need to sit back and just be a doormat. There are some people in our church who deeply love Jesus and their spouse has aggressively rejected him. Or they have done things that are immoral and painful, abusive. And I don't think that person in any way needs to stay to be abused like that. I think they need to protect themselves. I think they need to take care of themselves. And at the same time, pray for the person who is in that setting or in that situation. And I'm struggling with words because this requires a lot of details and so forth to really get clear on, and I don't want to betray confidences. But there's a way that you can be Jesus-centered yourself in a home that is not yet, while at the same time not being so burned by that environment.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is I think that there are many people that have had long-suffering relationships and marriages, and they really are fighting for what's right and what's true. And when they don't see headway, I've known people that prayed for their spouse for 20 years or prayed for a family member for 20, 30, 40 years and saw them come to faith, but they spent 20 years suffering. And so I know of parents that are praying for their kids because they've fallen away from the faith. They're like, I raised them right. What did I do wrong? And there's some mystery with that as far as faith and salvation and how God works that out. But I think that, you know, my greatest encouragement when I think about that is just don't give up. When you're talking about abusive situations, well, yeah, keep yourself safe. I mean, there's something to be said about that. But on the other hand, don't give up praying for people. Don't give up, realizing that you are in a dark spot maybe, and know it for what it is. So.
And I hear your call to not give up. And I just know several people who would say, you know what, for 15, 20 years, I didn't give up. But
now I'm done. Now I'm done.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily that they were done, but their spouse was done with them. And so after an affair, after an adultery, after physical abuse, I don't think anybody should have to stay in that. I mean, separation, Bible even condones that. Divorce after a lot of wisdom and counsel. But pray for your spouse. But I mean, the whole idea of don't give up and everything, I completely agree with that.
Well, I'm saying with kids and stuff. I'm not saying don't give up on the relationship. Right. I'm like when you're talking about situations where there's adultery, there's abuse, that's a different category. What I'm trying to say is, if you can't look at Scripture and see a biblical reason, like I'm being abused in this way, or I'm being abused in that way, or I've been abandoned. It talks about the abandonment of a non-believer in your marriage. And if those things aren't true, and it's like, well, I just don't like how they spend money. Yeah. Do you say there's certain things that are just really minor that we make major because we've been dealing with it for years. And so that's what I'm
tracking. Yep, 100%. We've just opened a can of worms. That's
I know. Well, and we're short on time, so that's why David, I don't think you're going to even get to answer this question. He's like, yes.
You're like, I'm okay with not answering this one.
So this week, I still had like 4 to 5 questions that I wanted to ask. And so what's interesting is I think next week is going to be the like marathon version. Episode 2 of Church Unscripted this year is going to have tons of different things. But I have one quick thing. I want like kind of a quick response. Considering the impact of mental health challenges in marital relationships, how can individuals facing conditions like anxiety, depression, and trauma be present and actively establish Jesus-centered homes in the midst of their struggles? Oh, yeah, I dropped that at the end.
You said an easy question?
Yeah.
I think you can answer it quickly.
Okay, so you're talking about the person who's dealing with those things. How do they be present?
Yeah. How do they be present?
Huh.
I'm not saying others...
Like you're not saying my spouse has that, how do I help them be present? You're saying I have that, how do I be present?
Yes.
Huh.
That may be a question for next week.
Well, no, I think I think there's a lot of help out there for one. Like we shouldn't be ashamed of getting help and talking to people.
Yes.
Counseling, stuff like that. I don't have an answer because I tend not to be one of those. Like I tend not to struggle with those as much. Mm-hmm. There's definitely been seasons where I have, but one of the things that I have to remind myself is like it's work, regardless of what I may struggle with. Mm-hmm. I still have to put the work in, and so I just read a book called Holy Noticing, and it is I think it would be a beautiful tool for somebody who struggles with this. It's an opportunity that it trains you to be aware of your mind, your body, your environment, and you spend 20 minutes just breathing, praying, reading Scripture, and it has, over the last week of my life, created a sense of peace in me that has been interesting. And so I can't say do it and it'll work, but I can say if you want to try something and you want to be more present, the best way that you can do that is spend more time with Jesus, and this might be a good practice. I don't know.
I think that's a good foundation, but man, that's a question that deserves its entire podcast. I mean, that's just,
what, you mean we're going to talk about it next week and the following? No,
we certainly
we will, yeah. And I think it's really important to kind of close on that. Like there are some loose ends from today, which I love. And some discussions that maybe we can continue in the next coming weeks, because we've got 6 weeks on this sermon series, and so we've got a lot to talk about when it comes to marriage. So if you're joining us today, please like or subscribe, and remember at the beginning of the podcast we talked about how we're on all podcast platforms starting this year. Episode 1 of season 2 of Church Unscripted. We've got some exciting things coming up for you, and we're looking forward to seeing you this next week.